The wartime president is elated, visiting the front lines. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has vowed victory in an unannounced visit to the recently liberated city of Izium. The town is located in northeastern region of Kharkiv. It was liberated this weekend from the Russian occupation. Zelensky thanked the military for their efforts and said that the Ukrainian flag would soon be flying in every part of the country. Izium is a strategic town, and its loss comes as a huge blow to Moscow. In the last few days, Kiev soldiers have pressed a stunning advance and have reclaimed large areas of territory in the country's northeastern Kharkiv region. On his during his visit to the devastated town, Zelensky said the grim scenes remind him of the Bucha horror.
The view is very shocking, but it's not shock for me because we began to see the same pictures from Bucha, from the first deoccupied territories. So the same, destroyed buildings, killed people, and so what can I say? That is the part of our real history and the part of modern today's Russian nation. Yeah, that they did it. Only them.
Now, the pace of Ukraine's counter-offensive has seemingly taken Russia by storm. Zelensky says about 8,000 square kilometers of territory has been liberated by the Ukrainian forces so far this month, and adds most of this reclaimed land is in the country's northeast and south. On the northern outskirts of Izium, the remains of Russian tanks and vehicles lay shattered along the road. The counter-offensive has left more weapons in Ukrainian hands as Russian forces leave behind dozens of tanks, armored personnel carriers and other heavy weaponry. Russia has commented on their retreat, but the Kremlin says its forces are regrouping and not losing. The Pentagon says they have noted the Russian forces retreating from the northeastern part of Ukraine back to Russia, but also said that Russian forces still remain in Ukraine. While Russia retreats from Kharkiv, it is still continuing with its offensive in other parts of Ukraine. Mykolaiev's civil military chief says at least 2 people were killed and 6 were injured in Russian shelling. The officials added educational institutions, infrastructure facilities and residential buildings have also been damaged in the city. Despite the massive advances by Kiev's forces, Washington, which is Ukraine's biggest backer, is not quite impressed. When asked, given the advances in the battlefield, US President Joe Biden remained guarded.
Mr. President, is this a turning point in the war in Ukraine?
The question is unanswerable right now. It's hard to tell. It's clear the Ukrainians have made significant progress. I think it's going to be a long haul.
Meanwhile, speaking at the plenary of the European Parliament, the EU chief Ursula von der Leyen reiterated her support for Kiev. Listen in.
Much is at stake, not just for Ukraine, but for all of Europe and the world at large. And we will be tested by those who want to exploit any kind of division between us. And this is not only a war unleashed by Russia against Ukraine. This is also a war on our energy. It's a war on our economy. It's a war on our values. It is a war on our future. It is about autocracy against democracy. And I stand here with the conviction that with the necessary courage and with the necessary solidarity, Putin will fail and Ukraine and Europe will prevail.
For more on this, we are being joined by Ben Aris, who is the founder and editor-in-chief of BNE IntelliNews. Thanks very much for being here. I want to first ask you for your assessment of the ground situation in Ukraine right now.
Well, the first thing to say is that it's been a stunning victory for Ukraine. That this came out of left field, that they were building up their forces to do an attack in Kherson in the center, and we were anticipating that for about 2 months. And it didn't come, and it didn't come, and then suddenly the counteroffensive started. However, it appears to have been a feint, a disinformation campaign, because what they did is they successfully withdrew Russian forces who moved their forces into Kherson and weakened their position in Kharkiv in the east. And then suddenly they delivered this hammer blow. They burst through Russian defenses and then ran amok into the northeast, the region around Kharkiv, and put the Russians on the run. I mean, they completely lost control of that whole region around Kharkiv. And no one was expecting that. But having said all of that, we have to say that the war is far from over, and that Russia still occupies the bulk of the Donbass region. Ukraine has made some advances into Lugansk, one of the two Donbass regions where formerly they occupied the whole thing. And they still remain in control of the land corridor that stretches between the Russian border down to the Crimea. And the Crimea, of course, they've been in control of since 2014. So Biden, I think this is why he was reserved about his assessment that the war continues, that Russia remains occupying thousands of kilometers square. But the political importance of this can't be underestimated. The motivation factor for the Ukrainian people is enormous, and the political factor whereby they can go to the West and ask for more support, more weapons, because victory is now palpable. It's there in front of them. And the demoralizing effect this will have on the Russian forces is also going to be enormous. And that is actually key, because if the quick end to this war would be if the Russian confidence evaporates and the soldiers refuse to fight and want to go home. And that is now also a possibility.
Since you mentioned that, what do you think is Moscow's strategy at this point?
Well, it's got to regroup and it's got to reassert itself. I mean, it's totally lost the initiative. The momentum of the attack in Donbass had already ground pretty much to zero. They'd stopped. And now it's got to come back and dig in. It's got to hold the territory it already has. And they've got to mount some sort of counteroffensive. And given the momentum of the Russian attack had fallen off to virtually zero before, it seems it's going to be very difficult. So winter's coming, and people are digging in. And Russia's advantage in this war remains so. It outguns Ukraine 10-1 with artillery. And if the Ukrainian forces stop moving, then they start to pound. And it's significant that the very first thing they did after the Kharkiv assault was that they shelled the civilian power plants in Kharkiv, and they subsequently hit another 25 towns and villages with artillery. And that's the plan, because the winter's coming and now Kharkiv is in the dark. It has no power or heating. And they're just going to make people's lives miserable in the hope that they can break their resolve to continue to resist. And it still remains to be seen whether they can hold the territory that they've got, whether this lack of confidence, with this fear, if it takes hold within the Russian forces. So this week remains crucial, whether Ukraine can consolidate their territory as taken, whether they can push their advantage further, or whether Russia can actually mount some sort of response to harden the lines that they already have.
Right. We're leaving it there for the moment. Thanks very much for being here. WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.